Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So, before we start on today's case, I just want to thank everyone who's come back, everyone who's watching on a weekly basis. Really, really grateful. If you can like, share, and comment on this video. If there's anything you want to add to the comments about this case, anything that you feel I've missed out, then please feel free to share. Now, I want to apologise again, it's a bit of a shorter video today. The main reason for that is just time restraints. So, I've now started a regular residency hosting quiz nights, and it just means obviously I'm doing my main job and I'm doing this hosting as well. So, whilst I'm still enjoying this and I still want to carry on doing YouTube, things just might be a little bit irregular at the moment, and it may not be the 45-minute, hour-long videos that you guys are used to, but I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm still going to be posting. So, with all that out of the way, if you can, like I said, like, share, and if you are here without subscribing, please feel free to subscribe. And I will always try and post by the weekend at the latest. So, with all that said and done, let's get into today's story. And today we're going to be talking about Craig Sorger. So, Craig Martin Sorger, he was born on February the 10th, 1990. And that was in Everett, which is a little town in Washington, D.C., so the capital of America. And he grew up with a younger brother, Keith, said to have a really good relationship with Keith. The pair of them were thick as thieves. Grew up with his mum, Lisa, and I couldn't find any information about his father, who his father was. And things for Craig weren't that easy when he was growing up. So he was diagnosed quite young with some complex social and special needs. He'd been diagnosed autistic, and obviously we can all appreciate that autism is a huge spectrum, but I couldn't find how the autism affected him. What I do know is that obviously he wasn't verbal, or not, he wasn't non-verbal, sorry. He was diagnosed with ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And he also had other developmental disabilities. Now, obviously, all of those added in, each one of them are complex enough for a child to understand, let alone an adult. To have all of those at the same time must have been a real struggle for Craig, like you can imagine. And he obviously struggled with being bullied over this. Obviously, his peers are not going to understand his social complex needs. They're just going to see him as someone who's a little bit different, someone who stands out for the wrong reasons or the right reasons, and it's just like a stick to beat someone with, essentially. So obviously with his complex needs, Craig was placed into special education systems. Now, because of the bullying and his hardships, his parents then moved him to the town of Elfraptar. Sorry if I got that wrong. So this is another little town in Washington. This is obviously for a fresh start, and this was around 2001, so he was about 11 years old. And he makes friends with two of his classmates. So that was Evan Savoy, who was born in November of 1990, and Jake Lee Eakin, who was born on November 14th, 1990. Now, Eric, he had grew up in Ephrata all his life, and Jake actually came from Moses Lake, which is obviously another town. Now, Jake and Evan, they had been friends since the age of 2, and according to Craig's younger brother Keith, they had played with Craig on numerous occasions. come knocking, there was never any problems with them. And they've been hanging around with Craig for quite some time. Now, Evan, he was described as quite a popular child. He was the class clown. But he was also always often seen bullying kids that were younger than him or ones that he saw as less popular. Jake, he's said to have had issues of his own, and he was bullied due to a speech impediment. Now, the way I see it, and you guys can disagree with me, that's absolutely fine. That's what we're all here for. Everyone's entitled to their opinions. I don't see, like, knowing this, that Evan ever really had any sort of true friendship with Craig. I think, personally, Craig probably looked up to Evan, wanted to fit in, and obviously tried to get in contact with what was seen as the popular boy. And this always leads to something going on. I done the very same thing when I was younger, when I was at school, because of the issues that I faced and problems that I had. I made friends with kids that I shouldn't have been friends with. And because I wanted to be seen fitting in, I got into a lot of trouble, done things that I shouldn't have done, and it was all just part of an act. And like I said, if you disagree with that, then that's absolutely fine. You're perfectly entitled to disagree with that. You're entitled to your opinion. But that is just my perspective on Craig, Evan, and Jake. And I think the same with Jake. I think he just looks up to Evan, and sort of Evan was the ringleader in all of this. Now, on February the 15th, 2003, so this was just 3 days after Craig's 13th birthday, Jake and Evan, they go to his home. They knock, and Lisa answers the door. Now, as it was back in those days, obviously some of you guys might remember, obviously kids used to do this all the time, you know, knock on the door and be like, oh, is so-and-so coming out to play? Now, Lisa, she agrees to this. Obviously, she wants her son to have what we would consider a normal childhood. But she says that he can go out under the condition that Craig was to be home before nightfall, as Craig was actually still scared of the dark. And according to Jake, the three boys then went to Oasis Park, which is just down the road. And what Craig was obviously unaware of was that one of the boys was carrying a knife. So the boys then go to Oasis Park and they play around for a few hours. And after this, Craig then gets asked by Evan to touch a particular spot on the ground. And this was just to see if the ground was still wet. So obviously, bearing in mind, obviously February time, it's quite rainy, quite cold, quite damp. So Craig, he obliges. He kneels down to see. He's touching the ground. And whilst his back is turned, Evan then picks up a massive rock. And it was described that this rock was about the size of a basketball. And he drops the rock onto the back of Craig's neck. Now, understandably, obviously, with the weight of this and the size that this rock would be, Craig has fallen forward. And Evan then jumps on top of him and he begins repeatedly punching Craig. And then Jake decides to join him. He picks up a tree branch and he begins beating Craig's head and legs. And then Evan pulls out the knife. He begins stabbing Craig, and in total, he stabbed him 39 times. So when the coroner report come back, they established that he had been stabbed 5 times in the chest and 34 times in the head and neck areas. They then sort of drag Craig's body away from the bushes and hide him in a bunch of leaf litter. And this leaf litter, it was quite close to a trail that the people obviously walk up and down on. And the boys then decide to leave him there. And while they're doing this, Craig is asking them, "Why are you doing this? What have I done wrong?" And they just leave him there. I don't know if he would have still been alive at this point. I hope he wasn't. But obviously they leave him in the dark, and there's a possibility that obviously Craig may have been alive for a little bit and just died from shock, blood loss, alone in the cold and dark. And the boys just casually get on with their afternoon, and they start walking back to Evan's house. So obviously nightfall approaches. Lisa, she's grown concerned, like Craig hasn't turned home, and she knows that her son is scared of the dark. And she begins walking about to see if she could find him, and this obviously with no luck. So she then goes to Evan's house, and she gets invited in. She walks in and she finds Evan and Jake just casually sitting there playing video games. So she asks them, where is Craig? What's happened to him? And they just basically said the last time they saw him was around 4:30, and that Craig had left them to start making his way back home. So they're trying to make it out that Craig has gone off on his own and someone could potentially have kidnapped him. So Lisa, she decides to form a search party, and this is with Evan's parents. She contacts 911, the local police station come down to help, and Evan even joins in with this search party for Craig. So obviously they're going through the park, flashlights, you can imagine, and eventually a police officer comes across Craig's body laying face down in the leaf litter. And immediately a murder investigation is launched. Like, obviously the police, they see this every day. They're not stupid. They know what has gone on. They know what's happened to him. And quite quickly, so after 3 days, on February the 18th, 2003, both Jake and Evan are arrested. And initially, they stick to their stories that they told Lisa. But after a while, I don't know how both the boys come up with this at the same time. I don't know if they had any contact or whatnot. But they then say that they saw Craig climbing a tree, and that Craig fell out of the tree, and that's how he had died. That's how he had sustained the injuries that he had. However, obviously, inspecting the area, there was no evidence to back this up. And this was later backed up by the coroner's report. They obviously said, well, this boy has 39 stab wounds in his body. He's got the bruising from obviously where he was punched. He's got the bruising from where he was attacked with a branch. This is not from falling out of a tree. Like, he's got stab wounds in his head and his neck. Like, there's no way that this could have happened if he fell out of a tree. A little while after this, obviously the knife that was used, so the boys had actually chucked this on a riverbank, and the knife was picked up. It was a positive ID for the knife wounds on Craig's body. And while they inspect the boys' houses, the police, they then find a diary belonging to Jake. And in this diary, Jake was heard and seen writing down support and idolization for the 2002 DC Washington sniper attacks. So, just on a little side note, with these attacks, they were committed by John Allen Muhammad, who at the time he was 41, and Lee Boyd Malvis, who was 17 at the time. Now, in a span of 10 months, these two men had drive around Washington and surrounding areas. They committed armed robberies, and obviously the clue is in the title of this case. They were armed with snipers. And this resulted in 10 people being injured and 17 people dying, with John later being sentenced to death by the lethal injection during a trial in 2003. And this was actually carried out in 2009. And Lee, because of obviously his age at the time, he was only 17 when this happened, he was given 6 life sentences. So as far as I'm aware, he's still in prison, or he'll probably die in prison. But because of his age at the time, he was 17, they couldn't give him the death penalty. So, back to the story with Craig. So Jake and Evan, they basically protested all innocence. But naturally, police didn't believe them. And they were eventually charged with Craig's murder. They were then sent to Grant County Youth Detention Centre to wait on remand to await their trial. So obviously we all appreciate that this would be a really testing time for Craig's family when someone who's up for murder pleads innocent and all the evidence points to their guilt. Naturally it's going to go to trial, which is incredibly expensive and incredibly testing time for the family of the victim. And this is what happens. Like, the boys are sent to a youth detention centre, they're held on remand, and the decision was then made to have Jake and Evan tried as adults. This decision was upheld by the courts. They declined to hear the case. And at 12 years old at the time of the murder, Jake and Evan, they actually became the youngest defendants for murder tried for said crime since 1931 in the state of Washington. And this is not that uncommon. I mean, obviously, if you think about the story of Jamie Bulger, so the two boys that are involved in that, Robert and John, they were obviously only 10 years old at the time that they committed their murder, and they were both tried as adults. And this is exactly the same as what they're doing here, because a particularly heinous crime has happened, committed by these two children. And at 12 years old, they know right from wrong. They know what they did was wrong. And which is why, obviously, they are trying to hide it with this pretend innocence. Now, whilst being held on remand and as it's coming up to the trial, Jake later, he has a complete 360 moment on his not guilty plea, and he instead enters a plea deal with the prosecutors. And this is after nearly 2 years on remand. So he instead decides that he's going to plead guilty to second-degree murder, and this is by complicity. And he agrees to testify against Evan. And in return of this, he will receive a lighter 8-year sentence, which, again, not that uncommon. You only have to look at the Gypsy Rose case that I covered a few months ago that everyone else has obviously covered in the past few years. She entered a plea deal which saw her boyfriend go to prison for the rest of his life, and she obviously was released back in December. Now, on April the 28th, 2005, Jake, he was then found guilty of the second-degree murder, and he was then sentenced to a 14-year imprisonment. And Superior Court Judge Kenneth L. Jurgensen, he ruled that there was absolutely no mitigating factors to allow a sentence of 8 years. And he felt that 14 years was more of a deterrent. He felt it was a more fairer sentence. In regards of obviously the plea deal, no matter how late this came about, no matter how late his guilty plea came, he still pled guilty. And when the verdict was read out, Jake's father Christopher and his stepmother Tammy, they shouted, they cried. The rest of his family reportedly acted really negatively towards this sentence. And then it became Evan's turn. So obviously there was a lot more evidence they had to go through with Evan, and the fact that he was still pleading innocent. And eventually, on July the 8th, 2006, he was sentenced to 26 years imprisonment for first-degree murder. And this was the maximum sentence that could be imposed to a child of his age. And Jake's lawyer, obviously, they stood up and told the court that the likelihood of rehabilitation would be any more effective after 26 years rather than 20 was ridiculous. So he's arguing that the 6 years would make no difference to his rehabilitation. He could do that in 20. Why not give him a 20-year sentence? And the judge, to Judge Jurgensen, he disagreed and said that the punishment must match the crime. So obviously how severe the crime was, his punishment was 26 years. This is what he deserved, and there was no way that the judge was going to back down on this. And Evan's mother, Holly, she was really, really critical of the case. She was critical of the judge, saying that her son was innocent. No one was listening to him. The judge was really biased because of obviously Jake's testimony. And the boys were then sent to Green Hill Training School to begin their sentences until they turned 18. So bearing in mind, obviously, around 2005, 2006, the boys would have been, 15, 16 coming up. So they wouldn't have been able to gone to an adult prison until they were reached a later age. And they eventually obviously did go to adult prisons to finish their sentences. Now, whilst Jake initially accepted his sentence, Evan did not. He still maintained that he was innocent throughout all of this. He then lodges an appeal, and one of the bases of the appeal was the judge denying part of the trial to be released to the public and the media. Evan, he still claimed innocence through his appeal, but eventually he does a 360 and he pleads guilty to second degree murder in 2013. And on March the 25th, 2014, he was given a reduced sentence of 20 years. Now, when he was 18, when he turned 18, he was sent to Airway Heights Correction Centre, and this was obviously to serve the remainder of his sentence. And eventually, he was released from prison in February 2023. Now, I have not been able to find any information about how he got on in prison. I believe he just served his sentence as he should. He done what he needed to do to get himself out, and he served his 20 years. Jake, however, so he was sent to Washington Corrections Center, and he was initially due for a release at the end of 2016. However, on June the 12th, 2016, so a mere few months after his initial sentence would have been finished, he makes an escape attempt, and this is successful. He managed to go on the run, and this only lasts for 2 days. He's then captured by US Marshals while he's boarding the bus. Then obviously he's returned back to the prison, and naturally, when this sort of thing happens, I mean, obviously you had the one a few months ago, I think it was Daniel Hussein, I believe. who made the escape attempt. They have to move them to a different prison because obviously the security of the prison is now in jeopardy. Like, if they've done it once, there was stopping them from doing it again. So he's sent to a new prison and he's given an extended sentence, and eventually he's released in February of 2017. Now, reports state that Jake is now married. He met someone not long after his release, and they're married and gone on to have 2 daughters. Now, I can't find any information of what he works as. What I do know is that Jake actually uses his spare time to take part in anti-abortion rallies. Obviously, some of us are aware that in some parts of America, it's now illegal for women to have abortions, which I believe is totally wrong. But that's by the by. This is not what this video is about. And whilst I was Googling who Jake was now as a person, I came across a Facebook profile. Now, I can't tell if this is a mock-up of someone using his name to discredit him as a person, because a lot of the pictures that are on there, they refer to him in the third person. And a lot of the posts are very negative. There's some posts that describe him as a neo-Nazi, and whilst it could just be him creating this and talking to himself in that way because he knows he's going to garner some sort of response and that's what he wants, it could just be that obviously someone is holding a grudge against him naturally and understandably. Now, since his release, he has been arrested twice. So he was arrested in 2018 for trespass. So I can only imagine that he's obviously broke into somewhere during one of the protests. I could be wrong, but I can only imagine that's the only reason that he was trespassing. And he was then again rearrested in 2022, and this was for larceny. So larceny is the unlawful possession of a person's property or their business. So he was arrested for this. I couldn't find any other information other than that. Now, in an interview, he then gave quite a few years ago, really, he issued a public apology to Craig, and he released an apology to Craig's family. So he just basically saying that he's really, really sorry for what's happened. He's sorry that Craig died, that he was responsible for it, so he's finally accepted his guilt. But I'm not gonna lie, some of the pictures I've seen of him, he doesn't look like someone who's guilty. He doesn't look like someone who wants to get on with his life in a peaceful manner. It just looks like someone who's content with creating as much disturbance and political unrest as possible. And I think that's just, he's obviously grown some sort of disdain while he's served his time. And he still comes across as the kid that he was, if that makes any sense. Like, I don't think prison has helped him at all. I don't think the lenient sentence that he got, quite frankly, I don't think that's helped him at all. And I mean, you see it all the time, like prison, something like it doesn't help people with their offences and reoffending. So that's all I've got time for you today. I do apologise again for it being a shorter video. I explained, obviously, at the beginning of the video why this was. But soon, obviously, I will be going back to the longer form videos. It's just obviously with time restraints and whatnot, I'm just going to concentrate on some shorter form videos. It's just because I only have so many hours in a day and so many hours in the week. I appreciate every single one of you who are coming back on a weekly basis. And just a massive thank you to everyone who's given me the time and support. Now, I'll be back with obviously everything that's going on. I'll probably the postings are probably going to be a bit irregular. I am going to try my best to do it on a weekly basis, as I have been for the past 9 months. But they may not be on the Fridays. But please know that I will still be here every single week. Yeah. So again, just a massive thank you. Please like, share, subscribe. Please comment if you feel that you can add any more information to this case down below. Fortunately, I can only talk about things that I can find, which is why obviously this one is only for the half-hour mark. But again, just a massive thank you, and I will see you guys next week for the next true crime story with Silhouette. Take care, and I'll see you soon.